As we now transition into our reflections together, I encourage you to continue to share and to process and to work through. I think it's important that each of us is allowing ourselves to take things in, to push back, to hold, and to be able to hear and take in stories. Because if there's one thing that we keep seeing and keep having to learn over and over again, is that when we suppress each other, when we hurt each other, when we suppress ourselves, it will bubble up in another way and it will do harm. And we can turn this around if we all truly have the discipline to do it. So with that, I turn to Rabbi Lazar.
Thank you, Aziza. I'm going to introduce myself, the context in which I see this film, and I'll ask Aziza afterwards. Perhaps we'll share, each of us after that, something that we found particularly disturbing, something frustrating, and then we're going to take questions and comments from the audience. I grew up in San Fernando Valley, in a Zionist home, very committed to conservative Judaism, which, for those that don't know, is a little bit of a misnomer. It's not traditional right-wing Judaism, it's actual liberal. And I rebelled against my parents and became Orthodox when I was 14 and 15. Spent a year in Israel in 10th grade, and then when I was 18, made Aliyah. I moved to Israel. I moved as an Orthodox, religious Zionist. I was there. During that time, my own views and feelings about what it meant to be a Jew in that piece of real estate in the world, what it meant especially vis-a-vis others who had been there long before my folks arrived. In other words, my Zionism changed drastically from a rather traditional Orthodox Zionism to a very liberal Zionism. Sasha and I have been here for the last 10 years after being in Sweden 4 years in between, each place getting a slightly different perspective of our lives there in Israel, but I only speak for myself right now. And there's another part that's important to know for the context of my viewing of this film, is that when I finished yeshiva seminary, a 5-year army seminary program, I went to settle in the Gaza Strip to form a farming community, a moshav, with just a few other people. We got married there in 1981, and we were there for another year afterwards. For 2 years, I was part of the settlement movement. I'm proud to say I wasn't violent in the way that we saw here. I'm less proud to say perhaps I was a settler, but it was an important part of my life, and I'd like to think I learned quite a bit from it. I spent a lot of time in the army, 6 weeks a year, every year until I was 42. And some of those years we were sitting in a fortress on the border of the Jordan River, watching to make sure terrorists didn't sneak across. But many of those years we were patrolling through Palestinian cities. We were during the Intifada, the first Intifada. I had to run after children who threw rocks. I had to go into people's homes in the middle of the night. And once again, while I'm proud that I never had to fire my weapon or use my club or raise a hand to anybody, I'm not so proud that I was part of that. It certainly wasn't something I envisioned myself as a child to live in the land of Israel. And so that's where I'm coming from when I see this film. And there's one more part of it. Masafer Yatta is an area where there are more or less 3 Israeli settlements that I know of. They were around at the time when we were in that world, in the early 80s. We were expected after we left the Gaza Strip by the people in one of those places that we would join them. Perhaps we thought we would at one point. We knew many of the people there and have kept up with what they're doing the same way they kept up with what I'm doing when I moved to the liberal world. And finally, I will say, I know many, many people, rabbis who are members of Rabbis for Human Rights, young people who studied Arabic, who have gone and lived and been amongst the people that are portrayed in this movie. This is not just one story. There are many, many stories. This happens to be the story that the documentary was. I'm coming to the film with that background. Aziza, please give us a little bit of background. First of all, what you do, your organization. People know, I think, the Rabbi of Hamidbar in Palm Springs. but what are the things?
Thank you for creating space again. I think these spaces are an intentional effort. They don't just happen on their own. It requires a will and it requires a resilience. And so that's actually what we do at NewGround. We believe that Muslims, Jews, and allies, when we create spaces for intentional conversations to talk about the things that matter a lot to us, we can find ways through together and we can deepen understanding. And as we know, where the deepening or the lack of understanding exists, that's where violence actually thrives. And so how can we change the dynamics and invest in our democracy that we love so much to create spaces where people can have rough draft conversations, where they can say what's on their hearts, and where they can actually see one another. Because if there's one thing that really stands out from this film, it's that there is intentional division. We have to be aware of it, and when it exists, and when we contribute to it. That happens when we hold up mirrors to each other. It happens when we're willing to sit with ourselves, when we're willing to sit with what we see in front of us, and just truly pay attention, willing to seek, willing to listen, and also to share our own voices. So to share a little bit more about who I am the daughter of a Palestinian man who was born in a little tiny village called Hamidbar. You won't find it on a map. It is now called Kfar bin Nun. Our family's home was demolished a long, long time ago. We had a mill, we had a home, and my uncle was the mayor of this little village. They were literally the royalty of this little tiny village. It's rolling hills, and if you go to Nevi Shalom, the village of peace, it's one of the only places that exists in Israel proper. It's a shared community where people have homes that are intentional altogether. But 2.5 years ago, when my brother went on our own pilgrimage to see where we are from, we stayed at Nevi Shalom, and we woke up in the morning to see the rolling hills of Kubab, which is also kind of, if you want a little bit more geography, because these places aren't very big, think Latron. Think outside of the outskirts of Jerusalem, kind of towards Ramleh. So, to give you an idea, sometime in the late 1940s, my grandfather had a relationship with a man at Gezer Kibbutz, and which was kind of fairly close nearby. And my uncle can still recount stories of going with my grandfather to go visit this kibbutz. And so a lot of it was happening then. This is along one of the main routes between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And so it was one of the first places, Palestinian villages, to fall. And there was a lot of violence, and it was clear that they were unsafe. And so my family literally left in the middle of the night, and they went into those rolling hills that I was telling you about, and they hid under the trees. My family eventually, at night, because this is the time of when wheat was in season, they would harvest the wheat, and they would bring it back to our mill to grind at night. On one of those nights when they came back to grind the wheat in the middle of the night, they heard a lot of movement outside, and my grandfather loaded his shotgun, which was audible, and he heard the man's voice, the man that he knew from Gezer, outside, and he said, "Ali, don't shoot. You are surrounded, and you will surely perish." So they stepped outside, and they were surrounded, and they were told to leave. And my my uncle, my great uncle, said, who was the mayor of Libab, said, "No, we will die on this land. This is our land. We're staying firm." And my grandfather said, "No, we have children. We love them. They will live another day." And so eventually the family left. But before they did, they were forcibly evicted. But before they did, the man from Gezer said, "Don't go the short way to Jerusalem, go the long way. The short way is basically on fire with violence, and your children will surely perish." And that information helped guide them, and it eventually saved their lives, because it was true. And they made their way to a little tiny village. If you visit it now, you can hardly see it on a map, but there's maybe a quarry there and maybe a little convenience store now. But it was a lot of refugees from 1948 landed in there and a bunch of other places. And so that's where they built life that's within 1967 boundaries. And then eventually, slowly, they made their way to Jordan, one person at a time, just searching opportunity, searching just to be able to learn and to be able to feed family. And so that's the story. That's my dad's side of the story. My mom's side of the story is that she's a Caucasian woman who has gone from the Methodist church and is currently at an Episcopalian church in the Midwest. And that's also a huge part of who I am. And for a long time, I resented it. I was like, oh, I always have to translate for this or for that or for whoever. And they always have ridiculous questions that are quite ludicrous. And now I realize there's a role for the translator. Sometimes it's exhausting and infuriating. And we all have to get better at becoming what Thich Nhat Hanh said, skilled at communicating. We can do better. We can do better to describe the things that we see in front of us and to create space for other people to describe what's in front of them so that we can find a way through this. And so that's why I do this. I do this because I know we can do better. I won't accept this reality. And I won't accept that my kids are going to have to grow up in this, whatever this is. This polarization isn't just something that somebody else does, it's something we feed. And we have a role to change the course. And so that's why I do it. I do it because there's a magnetic energy that pulls me in. And even when I want to go work at a coffee shop somewhere and give everyone around me, I realize I can't. I can't because it's so important that each of us learn to express our love in ways that people can see it.
Aziza, we'll take some questions in a little bit. Aziza, what of all the things, what was the scene that affected you the most?
You know, I felt the tension in my body, and I kept trying to breathe so deeply, but my heart was thumping and pounding and pounding. Especially in the scene where the settler shot Harun in the stomach. And then as soon as I saw that, I kept breathing and breathing. The scene that just feels like it's fused with it is the really tender scene of the other Harun's mother snuggling with her daughter and having that moment of saying, I love you, you know that, I love you. And so often, Palestinian moms, there's this story that we're somehow, we send our children to be martyrs. We don't love our children. You know what? I love my babies. My father loved me. My grandfather, my grandmother, and my grandfather loved them. And it's time to stop making up stories. And that's what it feels like. It feels like a web of stories that just keeps weaving and weaving. And so that's why those stand out to me. It's because we keep weaving these other stories instead of stepping in front, one foot in front of the other, and just seeing tenderness. It's already there.
For me, the crashing down, each scene of the bulldozer crashing down on a building, as if those buildings had souls, they were human. Opposite that, the way the soldiers and the settlers, but the soldiers would treat the human beings as objects. So those were the difficult things. I think for me, the most frustrating aspect of this film is that so many people, first of all, have an opinion about it, and that many people that have seen it are coming into it not with an open heart and with an open mind, but already know all the solutions to all the problems, moral problems that have arisen. For me, that's frustrating. It's frustrating as an educator. I'm frustrated because I don't know how to get that information important to have those conversations, mass dimension, so that more and more people understand how messed up, complex, how nuanced this situation is. And how about for you, as what's frustrating?
Ooh. You know what? To lean in more, like exactly where you are. It's frustrating, like that moment where the kids were in school and then the soldier literally closed the door on them, and the uncertainty of like, wait, what's going to happen right now? And then how they have to go through the window, and then how they have to watch as the school is demolished in front of their eyes. What does it mean for that generation of kids? Watch everything taken from the school to, I mean, I remember like even that angst of like the demolition order for the playground to, it's those kids. How do you grow up with that and not harden your heart? Like, how does that happen? And yet I think like the main Palestinian story, the person in the middle, the way he was actually looking at his Israeli friend and saying, you seem like you have too much energy, like you think you can change everything in 10 days. And a little bit more humility is what I took from that. These things frustrating because you want injustice to end, and yet if you start to just get frustrated, the frustration turns to a heart. And there's this verse in the Quran, chapter 5, verse 8, that says, don't let another person's hatred toward you swerve you from seeking justice. That is the highest level of piety. And so I keep reminding myself, you can't let your heart get hardened. You have to keep it soft, especially in these moments when you just feel so frustrated.
There was some criticism on social media that why are we showing this film and not many other films about what happened on October 7th, or other films for that matter. And we happen to show this one. Many of those films are shown in other Jewish communities. This is an event which is sponsored by not only our synagogue or Hamidbar, but by many of the churches in this area in conjunction with the cultural center. And this is one movie out of many. When it was shown last week in Haifa, a colleague of mine, a rabbinic colleague of mine, was there, and the Yuval and Basel were presenting afterwards, leading discussion, and people said there are so many other stories and so much other footage. There are hundreds of people who have been documenting, hundreds of Israelis, Jewish Israelis, who have been documenting this kind of thing, and they were asked, how come we didn't show those as well? That's from the other side, right? There's so much more. And they said that in the original version of the film, they were given feedback that it's too much. You can't focus. To focus just on this particular chamula. Chamula is like a larger family. So we've shown it here. We'd like to get some questions or comments. I just ask everybody that you keep it short, and yeah, please, and polite. Jane is on one side with a microphone, so why don't we start right there? Yeah, Carol, that's great, Jane. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just curious, are there no pro-settlement Israelis or Jews living in Palm Springs that couldn't have been, would have come and talked to us? Because surely they have their perspective. And I get it, what Aziza's trying to say, but until I hear their explanation or their rationale, I don't know, it would have been helpful. Because I'm sure they have their part to say. And I myself would be interested. Might not change my mind about them, but I would be curious.
No, I think it's important to seek the different perspectives. It's actually essential. I would never want to suppress another view. It's actually an essential part of how you diffuse the situation. You make sure people are seen and that they're not muted and that there's a space for them. And I think it's important to just seek out those different perspectives. Because the one thing that I keep seeing over and over again is there is an important dominant space for those perspectives, and I hear them on the news and the airways constantly. But what I frequently don't hear are actual Palestinians like speaking or being spoken and heard. But I think you're right. Like, you can't suppress people. It's actually important to listen. There is another voice too, is like Hanan Schlesinger, Rabbi, Rav Hanan Schlesinger, I think has spoken a lot also about within settlers, like he lives in a settlement. And I think there's different voices to seek out. So we need to stop marginalizing. Let's listen.
We'll trade off Michael over here. Mark?
Thank you. I have been told that there's been a lot of difficulty getting this documentary distributed in the United States. Is that true? And I've been told that AIPAC is responsible. Could you clarify that?
Listen, I've heard multiple different perspectives on this. I have heard that its distribution hasn't been the same. I don't know who's behind. But I also do know that I have seen, look, I don't live in Palm Springs, I live in Los Angeles, and I have seen this film play at many theaters for quite some time in Los Angeles. I think where there is a will, there is certainly a way, and I didn't expect to see this theater as full as it was when I entered, and I was like, okay, where there is a will, there is a way.
I don't know, Mark, I have no idea. I know that I read the same kind of things you do. I don't know what truth there is. As far as the previous comment, though, I think my reflection is this. This is about this movie. For me, it's about the movie. And to hear the story. It's not about making a decision about what's right or wrong in Palestine, in the Middle East, whether the army had the right to take these people away, to declare it. Those are issues that take a long time to iron out with a lot of nuance. There are a lot of organizations where that voice, as Aziza said, that voice is heard, especially Jewish organizations, in defense of. And so I thought it was our job here, or Hamidbar's job in this part of the country, to at least open up this window, this story. But please. It's all right. Microphone's coming. Oh, so he's got it. Afterwards.
Hello? Thank you for bringing the film here today and for sharing your perspectives. To this question, part of me is afraid of hearing the answer, but I'm wondering, did any other Jewish organizations in the desert, synagogues or other, want to join you in co-sponsoring this or oppose you? What was that like in building any sort of coalition to bring the film?
My work here over the last 10 years has been in close contact with my Christian clergy, more than my rabbinic colleagues, for a few reasons. No, are you asking why is that? Yeah, I was saying for a few reasons. One of the reasons is that I am known to be on the left politically when it comes to Israel, with my own experiences, and most of the other rabbinic voices in the Coachella Valley are not. So this is not an issue that we would have agreement on. I'll tell you, I'm very active. I've been very active over the decades in LGBTQ rights in Israel, in Sweden, here. Nobody needed me to be the ally. But I don't bring that campaign to my friends in the Roman Catholic Church or my friends who are imams in the Misgad, in the mosque, because that's not our overlap. And that's not my job to try to create coalition with everybody. So I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to offend people. There are a number of people who knew about it. There was one other synagogue where this was advertised, and perhaps those folks are here as well. But I hope that answers your question. But I think you have a question though, sir. What's that?
More of a comment. This is the most one-sided film that I've ever seen. I don't know how it possibly won the best documentary film. It's all about a wonderful, and it shows a lovely group of Palestinians, and I'm sure they are lovely and all the way they are, and demonized Israelis who are all bad. It's like cowboys and Indians from the 30s or 40s. There's no nuance to this film at all. You said it's basically a slice of life. I can understand that, but you have to give some perspective to why these things are taking place. And there's none of that at all. And it doesn't begin to address anything about like why there's a separate road, about Palestinian terrorism, about why Israelis are afraid, about even you at the beginning didn't even mention how Israel came to the, if you want to call it an occupier of the West Bank. You didn't mention any kind of a thing about the Six-Day War, about the defensive war where Israel was attacked on all sides and miraculously.
Okay, folks, hold on. Calm down. It's all right. It's all right. We understand.
Has not been expressed at all. And I'd like to ask you,
No. I'd like to ask to take a pause for a second. First of all, why don't you have a seat? Have a seat. Let me say the same answer I gave when in the back who asked the question. I don't think our job is to try to solve the entire issue. Our job, in my mind, as an educator, is to listen, to try to understand a situation. Now, the settlers are not being thrown out of their homes. People are. The settlers have been documented of violence themselves. Are there Israelis that are not involved in this? Of course there are. There are hundreds that document this kind of thing. They're Israelis. And you know what? They're all Zionists, as I am, sir. I believe that there is a place for the Jewish homeland in that part of the world. I believe we have a connection, a historical connection. But I also believe things that I wasn't told, perhaps you weren't either, growing up, that there were people living there before we got there from Eastern and Central Europe. There were people that had lives there. That the Israeli army, who we think is so ethical, and was, at least in my view, when I was in the army for all those years, sometimes does unethical things. That the Supreme Court is the final word of liberal justice. In this case, by the way, the demolitions are all legal from an Israeli point of view. Absolutely legal. But how did it come to be a military closed-off area? That has to do with Ariel Sharon in the 1980s, who specifically said as an agricultural minister, this land needs to be closed off as military zone so that these people won't spread. These people, by the way, are Bedouin. That's what they do. They wander around. But they've been in that particular area for 100 years. Now, that's more than I wanted to even say. Because I want us to listen to the story. If the story doesn't affect you at all, that's fine. I'm happy, though, that you came and you came to listen. So thank you. Okay. So one here and then down. Please.
I can't hear you.
Hello. Now, sorry. I just want to say something very positive about the film when you said that I found something that struck you. And for me, it wasn't one specific incident. What happened to that community was horrible. But what I took away from it was something very positive. And that was the fact that the Palestinians accepted Israeli journalists into the community. That two young men actually became friends and had conversations. And it's only through that kind of communication that we're ever going to see any change in this.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of words about, well, gentlemen in the front looking for justification. And you guys have spoken justice, seeking justice. I'd like to know what both your perspectives are. What's justice? What does justice look like? What does justice look for the Muslims and Palestinians? What does justice look like for the Hebrews? That's what each side appears to be seeking is justice. And I want to know what that looks like.
Please.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it looks like human dignity. It looks like being able to get the permit and build the house, and that's, yes, if you did something actually wrong because it wasn't up to code, that there's some kind of way for redress, but that there's a system you can rely on where there's real redress, and where you can still know that your kids can go to school and that they won't have their school torn down in front of them. Truth being able to be spoken out loud, that we're willing to hear it and show up even when we're uncomfortable, and be willing to be able to offer spaces for other perspectives, for the expression of other perspectives. I think it looks like being able to have the ability to take in these different ideas and to be able to offer our space ourselves. I was recently talking to a friend who talked about being in Rwanda following the Rwandan genocide, like within a year. And he talked about who's going to go and who's going to get married. And he's not from Rwanda. And his friend said, "Are you crazy? What are you doing?" He's like, no, I'm going to do this. And so he showed up, and he was welcomed with open arms to his mother-in-law to be. And there was a knock at the door, and there was a man who was asking her for forgiveness for killing her son the year before. And she looked at him and she said, "No, I'm not going to give you my forgiveness right now." And she was still able to hold her new son-in-law with warmth and affection, and she was holding enormous grief that she was still processing. But I look at what happened and the healing that's still, and the hardship that's still coming out of Rwanda, and the truth and reconciliation structures that they've built and worked in community. I think that's what dignity looks like. It's saying that my grievance still has a space, and that your grievance has a space, and that hers and his and theirs all has a space.
Justice in Israel-Palestine is really complex and really complicated. First of all, there are those Palestinians who are living inside of what we call the Green Line, pre-67 borders. And while they have a vote, and theoretically they get services and have full rights, they don't have full rights and don't get services, and there's a lot of discrimination in how they have to live their lives. In the West Bank, in what is occupied territory by Israel since the 1967 war, there are millions of Palestinians that have no rights. They have no vote. I'm sorry, you see that everybody here is really respecting the format. I'd ask that you do as well. So thank you. And so justice would be full representation. Some of us thought we were on the way to justice with the Oslo process. Others did not. Whatever would have happened doesn't matter because it didn't happen. Whether it was just because Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated or would have fallen through otherwise, we don't know. But what we do know, and now I'm getting to what justice might look like, is that there are two people that have claim to the same part of the world. Two people where each side basically is saying, "I'm not going anywhere," which we heard here, and the other side saying, "I'm not going anywhere." So you can try to fulfill that or try to seek an answer by domination and power, but I think what many of us are arguing is that will never lead to peace. There can be no peace without full representation. Now, does that look like a two-state solution? I used to be part of that. I used to believe in that. I don't know anymore. What will it look like? We don't know. But in the meantime, there's real life to deal with. There's people that need a place to live, a doctor to go to, water to drink, clean water to drink. There's life in the meantime. It's super complex, and any answer needs to be super nuanced. There was somebody who had their hand up before. Over here, she has the mic. Just a moment.
Hello? Yes, I want to thank you so much for showing this film. Me too. I go to St. Margaret's Episcopal, and I've been running the Forces for Peace in the Holy Land. And we actually were going to show this film in the summer, but so I'm glad that you have a great space to show it. And just, I think it's so important that, first of all, for me, and as Episcopalian, justice is human rights for everyone, human dignity for everyone. And that has not happened in Israel-Palestine for 75 years. So it's getting to equal rights, and that's why South Africa is very, and human rights organizations in an apartheid situation. I won't get into all that, but I want to really thank you. And I think just from my experience and being at St. Margaret's, that when I first started, my whole goal in the group was to educate. And I would show old movies, the beginning of Israel and Christians, and there's some excellent movies about the actual history that goes back. And most of the people that would come, we do movie night once a year, if not more often, but is, oh, how come I didn't know that? How come I didn't know that? I didn't know that. And that's not their fault, it's the media's fault. It's our American media. I've been, like I said, following this for 50 years. I was in the University.
Thank you.
So I just want to thank you so much.
Thank you. Jane, there's someone up here, or Michael, whoever's closer, who's had his hands up. Are you running? Who's going to get there first? Hi, Jackie.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to see this amazing movie. We all have a way of dehumanizing people we don't agree. Right dehumanizes the left, the left dehumanizes right. And it's so clear that soldiers in this. I was watching this. Oh my God, how can soldiers do what they do? It's with so much rage. And I'm also realizing that they have been inculcated, indoctrinated to dehumanize the Palestinians that they are serving. My son-in-law is a medic in the Israeli army, and he was for Passover. My daughter and son-in-law were here, and I was very, very proud. There was a group of soldiers in the Israeli army who publicly started to say, "We are not going to serve in West Bank or in Gaza," and that's one of the few times when that has happened. So I watched my son-in-law really struggle with how do I be who I am with the human values that I have, humane values, and serve in the army, because he was seeing these atrocities happen and he couldn't live with himself. He's feeling very connected to those in Israeli society who are also having those things.
Thank you.
I think there's something also I want to lift into what you're. Thank you for sharing so honestly. There are other ways that people are harmed. Like watching this, being in the Israeli army, Ali Abu Awad talks about this. He's also a nonviolent peace activist, and they have a house at Masafer Yatta, which, by the way, if you want to go and be part of the people who bear witness, and you can stay in the house as an international. But he talks about how there's all these people that are coming out of the army, and they're coming out and they're going to places like India and other places to try to cleanse the trauma that they were also born witness to. Those kinds of things manifest in other ways, and we don't, like, that impacts our other families too. And so I think what you were saying is like, is like also, I heard what you were saying about pride and like being able to see and stand up and look around. And I also wanted to name that there's other consequences when there are ways that people stand up, or like even for folks who are in the Israeli military who aren't necessarily the medics but are bearing witness, like it can do its own damage internally, and it impacts our loved ones.
She's had her hand up for quite a bit.
Hi, I'm Jewish, and I feel immense shame, and I'm very emotionally charged by everything, especially when hearing from a person who saw this film and can still not feel what we just saw, and not feel shame. I feel shame, and I'm ashamed, and I want to know how I can work through that. I'm not asking to feel ashamed of what people are doing in my name. I mean, I want to figure out how to get through that. And, I also have to just say, like, I'm American, but am I, like, ultra patriotic? No, I'm very ashamed of what Americans have done. Very ashamed of how this country was formed. And so I can see that, and I hope I can see that too one day soon. My question is for y'all, like, how do I get through this?
I'm going to ask Aziza to answer in just a moment, but to remind everybody of that one scene where Yuval says, "You're doing this in my name. What do you care?" So therefore, people do have a right, I think, to ask those questions. But Aziza, this is your life's work, this kind of thing. If you could give our young friend an absolute 100% complete answer to all of her issues.
I think that encapsulates it. It's our ability to see, to reflect truly and genuinely in this moment and in these actions that have happened over time. This idea of bearing or watching and observing the shame, not actually judging the shame, not for yourself, not for anybody else. What I'm saying is remarkably hard. It is very challenging. But to name the shame or to name the anger and to literally be able to watch it and pay attention and observe it from every part, because eventually it'll lose its hold on you. And that's really important. You need to be able to act intentionally and not let it just act in the background, because that's when you lose control and you do things that are not what you would represent you well. And the other piece is, so Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist teacher, was doing some training. It was doing a training with reporters, and he'd been doing it all sorts of places. He was doing it with reporters in India when there was an attack and there was a bombing and people were killed. And they're literally sitting around the table as this news is breaking, and he had just been giving them a big lecture about observing, about paying attention, really seeing what is there. And the reporters looked at him and said, "Really? Like, what does mindfulness say right now? Like, what should we do with this?" And he said nothing for a moment, and he just breathed. And eventually, when he exhaled, he said, "You need to describe everything you see, and only describe what you see. Don't add or editorialize all the other stuff, or the anger, or the rage, or the frustration that you're also feeling. Describe what you see. And in that way, we can emerge from this in a way that we can not become the obstacle to someone else being able to shut out the thing that we need them to see." That's how we build the skill, and that's how we honor the very goal that we're trying to do.
What a wonderful way to wind up our conversation. We've got to cut it short now, but I do want to thank Aziza for coming all the way from LA for this. Please take some time to look up NewGround, Muslim-Jewish Dialogue, to see the other things that she's involved in. We thank Michael Green again and all the staff here at the Cultural Center.
I just wanted to say, Richard, we've got people, or we will, out in the back, and sit by those doors, with the buckets. And if there's any additional money, any additional gifts you'd like to give to Aziza's organization today, we're taking an offering, because that's what we do. But this money will all go to support Aziza's organization. So if you'd like to do that, thank you.
That's how the rabbi had the pastor do the business thing on Shabbat. And finally, thank you to River of Hope Lutheran, to Church of St. Paul the Desert Episcopalian, St. Giles of Catholic Church, All Peoples Presbyterian of Cathedral City, Lumen the Desert Ministries, UCC here in Palm Springs, United Methodist Church, Palm Springs, and Or Hamidbar, and the Palm Springs Police Department for looking out for us today. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you again.